It was a chilly afternoon, and the sky was a dull gray, the kind of gray that made the streets feel colder than they really were. Amara walked down the cracked sidewalks, her backpack slung loosely over one shoulder. She had just finished school for the day, and her stomach reminded her that lunch had been waiting in her bag all day. Her mother, who worked 2 jobs just to make ends meet, had packed a simple sandwich and a small carton of juice. It wasn't much, but it was all they could afford. Amara was used to modest meals. She had learned early that life didn't always give people much, but it did give them choices. The choice to be kind. The choice to help someone else even when it wasn't easy. She kept that in her heart as she walked through the neighborhood, noticing the familiar sights, the worn-down houses, the uneven streets, and the occasional neighbor tending to their small garden. As she turned a corner near the small park, something caught her attention. A man was sitting on the edge of the sidewalk, his shoulders hunched, his clothes worn and dirty, and a thin blanket draped over him like a shield against the cold. His eyes were fixed on the ground, tired and distant, but there was something about him that tugged at her heart. Most people hurried past without a second glance, their minds filled with their own worries and routines. But Amara stopped. She could feel the man's exhaustion, his hunger, and even his loneliness, though she didn't know his story yet. She could see the outlines of his hands through the ragged gloves, the hands of someone who had worked hard once, hands that had built, mended, or created, but were now empty. Amara reached into her backpack and felt the small sandwich. It was her only lunch. Her stomach grumbled at the thought of giving it away. She had been looking forward to it all day. But the image of the man sitting alone and shivering was stronger than her own hunger. She took a deep breath and walked over to him. "Excuse me," she said softly. The man looked up, startled at first, then slowly focused on her. His eyes were wary, but there was a flicker of hope there, as if he hadn't expected anyone to notice him at all. I have this," she said, holding out the sandwich. "I know it's not much, but maybe it will help." The man's lips quivered and he shook his head. "I can't. You need it more than me," he said, his voice weak, almost broken. Amara shook her head firmly. "No, I want to give it to you." "It's okay. Please take it." There was a long pause. The man looked at the food, then back at her, as if trying to understand why someone so young would be willing to give away what little they had. Finally, he nodded slowly, his hands trembling as he took the sandwich. "Thank you," he whispered, barely above a murmur. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Amara replied, smiling gently. "Just eat, okay?" The man unwrapped the sandwich carefully, almost reverently, and took a small bite. Amara watched him, feeling a strange mix of warmth and emptiness. Her stomach growled again, reminding her that she was still hungry, but the warmth in her chest was stronger. She had done something good, something meaningful, even if it meant going without. After he finished eating, the man looked up at her with gratitude shining in his eyes.
"You're
very kind," he said. "Not many people would do what you just did. You really care." Amara shrugged, trying to seem casual, though her heart was racing. "I guess I just think everyone deserves a little kindness," she said. They talked for a few minutes longer. Amara learned that his name was Mr. Daniels. He had fallen on hard times after losing his job and facing medical bills he couldn't pay. He had no family nearby and had been living on the streets for months. Listening to him, Amara felt a mix of sadness and anger. Sadness for all the struggles he had faced, and anger that life could be so unfair. Eventually, she realized she had to continue home. "I should go," she said softly. "Take care of yourself, okay?" Mr. Daniels nodded, holding the small sandwich close as if it were a treasure. "I will, thank you. For everything." Amara walked away slowly, her stomach empty but her heart full. She knew her simple act wouldn't solve all his problems, but she hoped it would give him something more important than food, a reminder that someone still cared. As she continued home, she noticed small things she hadn't before. The way the leaves rustled on the trees, the way the wind felt against her face, the small smiles of neighbors as she passed. The world seemed a little brighter, even though she was still hungry. There was a strange satisfaction in giving without expecting anything in return, a sense that even small actions could make a difference. When she reached home, her mother noticed her empty hands and raised an eyebrow. "You didn't eat?" she asked, concerned. I gave it to someone who needed it more," Amara said quietly. She didn't want to sound boastful, but she wanted her mother to understand why she was smiling despite being hungry. Her mother paused, studying her daughter's face, then nodded slowly. "You have a big heart, Amara, that's a gift," she said. That evening, as they sat together with a modest dinner, Amara couldn't stop thinking about Mr. Daniels. She wondered if he was safe, if he had found warmth for the night, if he felt even a little better because of her small gesture. She knew she couldn't help everyone, but she also knew that kindness didn't have to be big to matter. In the days that followed, she passed the same street corner several times. Sometimes she saw Mr. Daniels, sometimes she didn't. Each time her heart ached a little, hoping he was okay. She began to notice the reactions of others too. Some people glanced at the street corners and moved on, indifferent. Some smiled at her when they noticed her kind act, and a few, she realized, were starting to talk about what she had done. It didn't take long before whispers began to spread. People in her neighborhood started telling their friends and families about the girl who had given her only meal to a homeless man. Some were inspired, saying they wished they could do the same. Others were skeptical, wondering why a young girl would risk going hungry just to help a stranger. Amara, however, didn't care about the whispers. She cared about the man she had helped and the small warmth she had given him. It was enough for her to know that her choice, however simple, had made a difference in someone's life. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about what kindness really meant. It wasn't about recognition or reward. It wasn't about being praised or noticed. It was about seeing someone else's need and choosing to help, even when it was hard. And in that moment, Amara knew that she would continue to do so. No matter what, she didn't know it yet. But her small act of generosity was about to set off a chain of events that would touch not just Mr. Daniels, but the entire town. Something as simple as a sandwich, shared with someone in need, could spark hope, change, and inspiration in ways she could never imagine. For now, though, she closed her eyes, feeling a quiet happiness. She had given her only meal to someone who truly needed it, and in return, she had received something far greater, a sense of purpose, a sense of connection, and a reminder that even in a world full of struggles, kindness could shine through. After that afternoon, Amara's small act of kindness didn't stay a secret for long. People in the neighborhood began talking. At first, it was a quiet whisper between neighbors. "Did you hear about the girl who gave her lunch to that homeless man?" someone would say. Others shook their heads in disbelief. They knew how little she had. How could someone so young who had so little give away her only meal? Word spread slowly at first, but it was like a ripple in a pond. One day, as Amara walked past the corner where she had met Mr. Daniels, she noticed a few neighbors lingering nearby, talking in low voices. Their eyes followed her. She felt a mix of embarrassment and curiosity. She didn't know they had heard the story, and she certainly hadn't done it for attention. The next day at school, a few classmates approached her. "Hey, Amara," one of them said, hesitating. "I heard what you did. Giving your lunch to that man, that was—" "Wow." Amara shrugged, a little uncomfortable. "I just thought he needed it more than me," she said. "Still, that's really brave," another classmate added. "I don't think I could ever do that." Amara smiled quietly. She didn't feel brave. She just felt that it was the right thing to do. But seeing the reactions of others made her realize that something small could feel big to someone else. Meanwhile, in the community, the story took on a life of its own. A local shopkeeper who had seen Amara walk past the street corner told a friend who worked at a small local newspaper. By the next week, a short article appeared online, highlighting the kindness of a young girl who had shared her only meal with a man living on the streets. The article wasn't long or flashy. It didn't use fancy words or dramatic photos. It simply told what happened. A teenage girl noticed a man who was hungry and chose to help him, even though she didn't have much herself. But it didn't take long for the story to catch the attention of people outside the neighborhood. Comments poured in online, strangers praising Amara for her compassion and courage. Some shared similar experiences of helping strangers. Others admitted they were inspired to think differently about those living on the streets. Amara didn't read the comments. She didn't want the attention. All she wanted was for Mr. Daniels to feel a little less alone, a little more hopeful. She went about her daily life, helping her mother with chores, studying for exams, and occasionally stopping to wave at neighbors she had known all her life. Her world was small, but her heart was big, At the same time, Mr. Daniels noticed the change too. After that first meal, he started to feel a little more human, a little more seen. The kindness of a stranger reminded him that people could still care. It was as if Amara's small gesture had lit a tiny spark inside him, one that had been nearly extinguished by months of struggle and loneliness. He began taking small steps to improve his life. He found temporary odd jobs, cleaning cars and helping at a nearby warehouse. It wasn't much and it didn't pay well, but it was enough to give him hope that he could start over. He cleaned up his appearance as best as he could, buying small things for hygiene and trying to look presentable. Each day when he walked past the same corner, he remembered Amara's generosity, and it gave him strength to keep moving forward. The community began to notice the changes in him as well. People who had once ignored him now smiled or nodded as he passed. A few offered small jobs or tips. Slowly, he regained confidence that he had lost over the years. And even though Amara wasn't aware of all of this, her single act of giving had started to ripple outward, touching lives beyond just hers and Mr. Daniels. Some of the local shopkeepers, inspired by the story, began to quietly help others in need. One bakery started donating leftover bread at the end of the day. A small cafe offered free coffee to those who could barely afford a cup. People in the town started talking differently about kindness. They didn't see it as something that required a lot of money or grand gestures. They saw it as something simple, giving a little, noticing someone else, sharing what they could. Even at school, students began to show more empathy. They noticed who might be struggling, who might be lonely, who might need a friend. Some brought extra snacks to share. Others offered to help classmates with homework or chores. Amara's small act was becoming a quiet lesson in generosity, showing that anyone, even a teenager with almost nothing, could make a difference. Amara herself didn't think about the impact she was having. She simply continued to live her life with compassion, but she did notice how some people looked at her differently, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with curiosity. She wasn't used to attention, and it made her a little nervous. But it also reminded her that kindness mattered, that it could be seen and felt even when you weren't looking for recognition. Meanwhile, Mr. Daniels's story continued quietly alongside hers. He would tell a few people about the girl who had given him a meal, though he didn't know her name at first. He described her kindness, the warmth in her eyes, and the way she treated him like a human being rather than someone invisible. People who listened to him were inspired as well. They began to understand that the homeless weren't just faces on the street. They were people with stories, struggles, and dreams. The town slowly began to change little by little. Conversations about helping others became more common. Small acts of generosity were celebrated quietly. People realized that kindness didn't have to be big or expensive. It could be a sandwich shared, a smile offered, or a few words of encouragement. Even though Amara didn't know the full extent of her impact, she began to feel proud of the way she had acted. She realized that it wasn't about being recognized or praised. It was about choosing to do the right thing, even when it was hard, even when it cost her something. And in that realization, she felt a new sense of strength, a feeling that she could make a difference, one small act at a time. In the weeks that followed, she continued her routine, occasionally walking past the street corner and hoping to see Mr. Daniels. Sometimes he was there, sometimes he wasn't. But every time she thought of him, she felt a quiet warmth in her heart. She knew that what she had done mattered, even if it was just to one person. And sometimes that was enough to change everything. The story of Amara and Mr. Daniels began to reach more people outside the neighborhood. Friends of friends, strangers online. Even a local radio station picked up the tale. The message was simple. A small act of kindness could have a ripple effect that reached farther than anyone imagined. People began sharing their own stories, inspired by a young girl who had shown that generosity didn't require wealth, only heart. Through it all, Amara stayed humble. She didn't seek fame or attention. She continued to help where she could, offering a kind word, a small gesture, or a listening ear. And even though she didn't know it, her actions were slowly transforming the town around her. People were learning to notice others, to care, to act with compassion rather than indifference. As winter approached and the days grew shorter and colder, the lessons of that small act of giving became even more meaningful. The town, which had often been too busy or too distracted to notice those in need, started to pause and reflect. And though many didn't yet realize it, a chain reaction had begun, one that would continue to spread hope, warmth, and kindness for months to come. Amara, unaware of how much influence she was having, continued to live her life quietly, helping others whenever she could. But in the quiet moments when she thought about the man she had fed, she felt a sense of fulfillment that was deeper than anything else. It was the kind of feeling that came from knowing that even one small act could matter, could change a life, and could inspire others to do the same. And somewhere on that cold street corner, Mr. Daniels felt the same thing. He remembered her eyes, her courage, her willingness to give without expecting anything in return. And every time he thought of that day, he felt a spark of hope, a reminder that kindness existed in the world, and that it could come from the most unexpected places, even from a young girl with an empty stomach and a generous heart. After that day when Amara gave him her only meal, Mr. Daniels couldn't stop thinking about her. Her kindness had stirred something inside him that he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. For months he had wandered the streets feeling invisible, forgotten by the world, weighed down by failure and loss. But the act of a young girl noticing him, caring enough to give what little she had, reminded him that he was still human, that he still mattered. His life had once been different. Years ago, he had a steady job as a carpenter. He was skilled with his hands, building and fixing things with care and precision. He had been proud of his work, proud of the home he had provided for his family. But a sudden illness in his family, combined with mounting medical bills, had drained his savings. One setback led to another. He lost his job when the company downsized, and the debt piled up faster than he could handle. Slowly, he lost his home, his possessions, and the life he had worked so hard to build. He didn't like to think about it too much, but the memories lingered. He remembered the first night he had slept on the streets, the cold seeping through his thin coat, the fear of not knowing where his next meal would come from. He remembered walking past people who avoided eye contact, pretending he wasn't there. He had felt invisible, like a shadow in a world that had no room for him. Then Amara appeared. Her small act of giving reminded him that someone saw him, not just as a homeless man, but as a person. Someone recognized his struggle, and instead of turning away, she offered help. That moment changed something inside him. He realized that if someone so young could show generosity, then maybe he could still rebuild even in small steps. He began taking small actions. He found odd jobs around the neighborhood, helping at a local hardware store, cleaning yards, carrying groceries for elderly neighbors. It wasn't much, and the pay was minimal, but it allowed him to buy small things he needed like soap, clean socks, and a warm blanket. Each day he worked, he felt a little more dignity return, a little more confidence that he could stand on his own again. Cleaning himself up became a priority. For the first time in months, he shaved, combed his hair, and bought clothes from a thrift store. These were small steps, but to him they felt monumental. He began to smile more, to speak to people when they acknowledged him, to make eye contact without fear. And every time he passed the corner where Amara had given him the sandwich, he felt gratitude swell in his chest. He wished he could thank her properly, but he didn't even know her full name. He started noticing the small kindnesses in the world around him, things he had ignored while consumed by his struggles. A neighbor offering a warm drink, a shopkeeper giving him extra change, a passerby asking if he needed help. These gestures, combined with Amara's simple act, reminded him that humanity wasn't gone. It was still present quietly, in unexpected places. The story of Amara's generosity had reached the ears of a few local community leaders as well. They had read about her on social media and discussed the potential for the story to inspire change. Some decided to quietly support Mr. Daniels, offering temporary work and guidance. They didn't advertise it, didn't make a show of it. They simply extended a helping hand to someone who wanted to rebuild his life. For Mr. Daniels, it was a turning point. He started thinking not just about surviving, but about creating a future for himself again. He set small goals, earning enough to rent a room, saving for basic necessities, and eventually finding a stable job. Each goal, no matter how small, felt achievable, and with each step, he felt more alive, more connected to the world that had once ignored him. He also began reflecting on the power of small acts of kindness. One sandwich had reminded him of his worth and given him the courage to try again. One simple choice to give without expectation had rippled outward in ways he could barely imagine. He realized that kindness wasn't just about giving material things. It was about showing empathy, recognizing another person's humanity, and offering hope when it seemed impossible. Meanwhile, the town began to see subtle changes as well. People were inspired by the story of the young girl who had given her meal. Some brought extra food to local shelters. Others volunteered time to help those in need. Conversations about empathy and generosity became more common in schools, workplaces, and homes. People started noticing each other in ways they hadn't before. A simple act by a teenager had sparked a quiet movement in the town, proving that anyone, regardless of age or means, could inspire change. Mr. Daniels noticed these changes too. He saw people treating each other with more care, speaking more politely, and offering help to strangers. He realized that acts of kindness were contagious. Just as Amara had influenced him, he could influence others. He began volunteering at a local shelter when he could spare a few hours, helping people who were struggling like he had been. The feeling of being useful, of giving back, was powerful, almost as meaningful as the support he had received. Even though Amara remained unaware of the full extent of her influence, she continued living her life with compassion. She helped classmates who struggled with homework. She comforted friends who felt lonely. And she shared small gestures of kindness wherever she could. She didn't do it for recognition. She did it because she believed it was right. And the more she acted with generosity, the more she learned that kindness had its own quiet power. For Mr. Daniels, Amara's gift was the catalyst for change. But it was his own efforts that allowed him to rebuild. Every step he took, every small choice to improve his life, was fueled by the hope that someone, somewhere, believed in him. That hope had been planted by a teenager with a sandwich, a simple act that reminded him he could still matter in the world. As the months passed, he continued to make progress. He saved a little money each week, rebuilt his confidence, and even found a small room to rent. The streets no longer held him prisoner. Instead, they became a reminder of how far he had come, and in every step of that journey, he carried the memory of the girl who had shown him kindness when he needed it most. The story of Amara and Mr. Daniels became a quiet legend in the neighborhood. People would sometimes recount the tale to children, emphasizing the power of empathy and generosity. The story was simple yet profound, a reminder that even in a world filled with struggles, acts of kindness could transform lives. Mr. Daniels often thought about what he would say to Amara if he ever met her again. He wanted to tell her how much her gesture had meant to him, how it had sparked the courage to rebuild his life. But he also realized that her act wasn't about recognition or thanks. It was about compassion, and he wanted to honor that by living a life that reflected the generosity she had shown him. In this way, both their lives were intertwined, not by friendship or family ties, but by a single moment of selflessness. Amara's choice to give, even when she had little, became a turning point for someone whose world had felt hopeless. And for Mr. Daniels, that small act ignited a series of changes that allowed him to reclaim his dignity, find purpose, and begin to heal from the hardships he had endured. Even as winter turned into spring, and the streets warmed with the return of sunlight, the memory of that day remained vivid in both their lives. It was a reminder that human connection, empathy, and kindness could exist in even the smallest gestures, and that one act, no matter how seemingly minor, could ripple outward to touch countless lives in ways that were impossible to measure. And though Amara did not know the full story, and Mr. Daniels could not yet thank her properly, the seed of hope, trust, and compassion that she had planted continued to grow. It spread quietly through the town, inspiring others to notice, care, and act in ways they might never have imagined. Weeks passed since Amara had given her only meal to Mr. Daniels, and life slowly returned to its usual rhythm for her. She walked to school, helped her mother at home, studied, and occasionally ran errands. But even in her routine, the memory of that moment lingered, quietly tucked in her heart. She didn't expect to see Mr. Daniels again, yet somehow, a small part of her hoped she would. One crisp morning, as she walked through the familiar streets toward the small grocery store to pick up a few things for her mother, she noticed someone standing near the corner. It was him, Mr. Daniels. He looked different now. His clothes were cleaner, his hair combed neatly, and he even had a small backpack on his shoulders. For a moment, Amara barely recognized him, but when their eyes met, both of them froze. A mixture of surprise, relief, and joy passed between them. "Hello," Amara said softly, almost hesitant. Amara, he replied, his voice warm, tinged with gratitude. I wasn't sure I'd see you again. They began talking. The conversation started awkwardly, but soon it felt natural, like two people who had shared something important, but hadn't yet fully understood its impact. Mr. Daniels told her about the small changes he had made, finding temporary jobs, saving enough to rent a small room, and taking care of his health. He spoke with pride but also humility, never forgetting the moment that had sparked this shift, the day Amara had given him her sandwich. Amara listened quietly, feeling a mixture of happiness and relief. She had no idea that a single gesture could have such a profound effect on someone's life. And yet, here he was standing before her, proof that kindness, even when simple and small, could change everything. As they talked, a few neighbors who recognized Mr. Daniels began to approach. Some had heard about his progress and were curious to see him. They greeted him warmly, offering congratulations and small tokens of support, a bag of groceries, a warm coat, or even just a smile and kind words. The transformation was noticeable. The man who had once been invisible on the streets now inspired attention, care, and respect. Amara felt a quiet pride. She hadn't done it for recognition, but seeing the ripple effect of her action made her heart swell. The neighborhood, which had often been indifferent, was starting to change. People were noticing others' struggles more, offering help, and engaging with kindness in ways they hadn't before. In the following days, the story of Amara's kindness and Mr. Daniels's progress reached more people. Local businesses began to quietly support him. A small cafe offered him free coffee while he worked on temporary jobs nearby. A local grocery store gave him discounts when he bought essentials. Even neighbors who had once ignored him were now lending a hand, inspired by the story of the girl who had given her lunch. Mr. Daniels also began giving back whenever he could. He helped an elderly neighbor carry groceries, offered to fix broken furniture for a small fee, and volunteered at the local shelter on weekends. Each act reminded him of what had sparked his new path, Amara's simple gesture of generosity. He realized that helping others didn't require wealth or grand gestures, just the willingness to care and take action. Amara and Mr. Daniels continued meeting occasionally. They would sit on a park bench near the corner where they first met, talking about their lives, dreams, and plans for the future. These conversations weren't just casual. They were full of lessons, encouragement, and inspiration. Amara learned more about resilience, patience, and the power of hope. Mr. Daniels learned that trust and kindness could be returned in ways he never expected. The town began to notice the changes more broadly. Stories of small acts of kindness were shared in local newspapers and on social media. People started talking about empathy and compassion, inspired by the example of Amara, a young girl who had given what little she had to help someone in need. Even children at school began to notice that small gestures mattered, sharing lunch, helping a classmate, or comforting someone who was lonely. One day, a local community leader approached Amara at school. "We've been following the story," he said. "Your actions, your kindness, it has inspired so many people. We want to do something to recognize that, and also to encourage others to help where they can." Amara felt nervous. She had never sought recognition. She simply did what felt right. I don't need anything," she said softly. He smiled. "We know, but the story is powerful. It reminds people that anyone, no matter how young or limited their resources, can make a difference. We want to celebrate that." Meanwhile, Mr. Daniels was thriving quietly. He had rented a small room in a safe neighborhood, started saving money, and was gradually finding more stable work. But more than that, he had regained his dignity, his confidence, and a sense of purpose. He often thought about how fragile life could be, how easily someone could be forgotten, and how one act of compassion could light a path out of darkness. He also realized something important. Kindness wasn't just about giving what you have, it was about seeing someone else, acknowledging their humanity, and acting even when it was inconvenient or difficult. Amara's act had been inconvenient for her in the moment. She had given up her only meal, but she chose to act anyway, and that choice had changed his life. Amara and Mr. Daniels' story became a lesson for the town. It wasn't a story of wealth or fame. It wasn't about dramatic rescues or grand gestures. It was about the quiet power of human connection, empathy, and generosity. People began to look around more carefully, noticing those who might need help and asking themselves how they could make a difference in small ways. Even in small, subtle ways, the town began to change. A few shopkeepers started giving leftover food to those who were hungry. Neighbors checked in on each other more often. Children were encouraged to help classmates share and show compassion. The ripple effect was gentle but steady, spreading quietly through homes, schools, and streets. Amara continued her life modestly, but with a sense of purpose she hadn't had before. She began volunteering at a small community center on weekends, helping younger children with reading and homework. She learned that giving time, attention, and kindness could be just as impactful as giving food or money. Her actions inspired other teens in the neighborhood, who started finding their own ways to help, creating a quiet network of compassion. For Mr. Daniels, each day brought a new challenge but also a new opportunity. He found work as a carpenter again, this time for a small local company. His skills were valued and his diligence and honesty earned him respect. The neighborhood watched his progress, feeling inspired by his resilience and by the power of a single act that had set everything in motion. Amara and Mr. Daniels also realized something else. Their bond wasn't just about gratitude or admiration. It was about understanding. Amara had acted without expecting anything, and Mr. Daniels had worked hard to honor that gesture by rebuilding his life. Their connection was a quiet testament to the power of human empathy, showing that even small acts can lead to meaningful, lasting change. One spring afternoon, as the sun began to set, they met at the park once again. Children played nearby, neighbors waved to each other, and the streets felt warmer than they had in years. Mr. Daniels looked at Amara and smiled. "You have no idea how much you changed my life," he said softly. Amara shook her head. "I just gave you a sandwich," she said, laughing lightly. "It was more than a sandwich," he replied. "It was hope. It reminded me that people care, and that gave me the courage to keep going." They sat together for a long while, talking and laughing, sharing dreams and plans. The town around them seemed to move a little slower, a little gentler. People were noticing each other more, acting with more patience, empathy, and understanding. And all of it traced back to a single act, a simple meal given from a kind heart. By this point, the ripple effect of their story had grown beyond their own neighborhood. Teachers, shopkeepers, and even strangers online shared the tale, using it as an example of how small gestures could have enormous impact. It reminded everyone that wealth, fame, or power weren't necessary to make a difference. All that mattered was compassion and action. Amara's life continued with humility and quiet purpose, while Mr. Daniels's life blossomed with hope, hard work, and gratitude. Their stories intertwined in ways neither of them could have imagined, each learning lessons from the other. One had learned the profound power of kindness, and the other had learned how to rebuild a life from the smallest spark of hope. The town was slowly transforming, becoming more compassionate, more aware, and more connected. People learned to notice small struggles, to offer help quietly, and to act without expectation. And though the changes were subtle, they were meaningful. A single act of generosity had started a chain reaction, proving that even in a world full of challenges, hope and kindness could thrive. Amara's small gesture had become more than a story. It had become a movement, one that spread quietly but steadily, changing lives one heart at a time. Months had passed since that chilly afternoon when Amara had given her only meal to Mr. Daniels. Life in the town was slowly changing, one small act at a time. But the biggest changes were happening quietly in the lives of the two people at the heart of the story. For Amara, her days were still filled with school, helping her mother at home and small chores. But she had also started noticing something new, how her actions could ripple outward in ways she had never imagined. Mr. Daniels, on the other hand, was no longer the man who had sat hunched on the street corner. His life was far from perfect, but it was stable, hopeful, and full of potential. He had a small apartment, a steady job as a carpenter, and a renewed sense of purpose. The smile he wore these days was no longer forced or rare. It was genuine, and it carried the warmth of someone who had been given a second chance. One Saturday morning, Mr. Daniels decided to pay forward the kindness he had received. He knew he could never fully repay Amara for what she had done, but he could extend the same generosity to others. He started visiting the local shelter, helping with repairs and assisting people who were struggling to find their way back on their feet. The work was hard, But every hour he spent reminded him of how far he had come and how important it was to act with compassion. Word of his efforts began to spread, and the town started noticing him in a new light. People who had once looked past him without a thought now greeted him warmly. They admired not only his determination to rebuild his life, but also his willingness to help others along the way. The change in Mr. Daniels reflected the message that had started with a simple sandwich. Kindness could inspire hope and create lasting impact. Meanwhile, Amara's story continued to reach people far beyond the neighborhood. Teachers at her school began using it as an example in lessons about empathy and community service. Local newspapers and small online platforms highlighted the ripple effect of her actions, showing how a single choice could inspire many. Young students started finding small ways to help classmates or neighbors, and even adults began reflecting on their own behaviors and how they could make a difference. One afternoon, Mr. Daniels and Amara happened to meet at a local community center where she had been helping younger children with reading and homework. When she saw him, her eyes lit up, and he returned the smile with warmth and gratitude. "I wanted to see you again," Mr. Daniels said softly, "to tell you, thank you. I've changed my life because of what you did. I don't know if you realize how powerful that moment was." Amara blushed slightly, shaking her head. "I just wanted to help. I didn't think it would lead to all this. It led to more than you know," he said. "I'm working again, I have a place to stay, and I've been helping others. You showed me that kindness matters. You showed me hope." For the first time, Amara felt the full weight of what her actions could do. It was more than just feeding someone. It was about giving dignity, respect, and a reminder that every life matters. She realized that even small acts done with care could grow into something bigger than anyone could imagine. The town, inspired by their story, decided to honor the message of kindness in a quiet celebration. Local leaders, neighbors, and students gathered at the park near the corner where it all began. The event wasn't flashy or formal. There were no awards or speeches full of grandeur. Instead, it was simple, heartfelt, and meaningful. People shared stories of kindness they had witnessed. Others talked about the ways they had helped strangers, and children passed out small handmade notes with messages of hope. Amara and Mr. Daniels stood together, not at the center of attention, but quietly observing the impact of their journey. It was clear that the town had begun to change, not overnight, but slowly, thoughtfully, with compassion. People were noticing those who needed help, offering support and taking small steps to make a difference. During the event, Mr. Daniels took Amara aside. "You know," he said, "I think this is only the beginning. There are so many people who need help, and your story reminds everyone that even small actions matter. You've given the town a gift." Amara smiled quietly. "I didn't do it to change the town. I just wanted to help one person." "You did," he said. "And look where it's led. One act, one meal, one choice to care. It's inspired more than you'll ever know." That day, both of them understood the quiet power of kindness. It didn't require wealth, fame, or attention. It didn't need to be perfect or dramatic. It only required a willingness to see someone's need and act with compassion. In the weeks following the event, the changes continued to ripple. Mr. Daniels helped more people in the community, volunteering time and sharing his skills as a carpenter. Amara continued helping at the community center and started small initiatives at school, encouraging classmates to practice kindness in daily life. Even strangers began noticing the culture shift. The simple act of giving could grow into an environment of care and empathy. For Amara, the most important lesson wasn't the recognition or the story spreading online. It was knowing that her choice had given someone hope, sparked courage, and inspired others to act. She had learned that kindness isn't measured by what you give, but by the impact it creates. For Mr. Daniels, every day was a reminder of the generosity that had changed his life. He had learned that even in the darkest moments, hope could arrive from the most unexpected places. A single act of compassion had given him a new life, one where he could regain dignity, purpose, and connection to the world. The story of the young girl and the homeless man became a quiet legend in the town, told in schools, shared among neighbors,